Welcome to the Photographer Show, where we talk to you, the everyday photographers in the photo focus community, about your love of photography and dig into some of the fun, nerdy stuff that we all love about the art and craft of photography. My name is Scott Weidenkibowitz, and today my co-host, Lori Novak, is not with us. She couldn't be here today, but I am happy to share that my friend Steve is here as the guest, and we're going to talk to Steve about, as I just said, the fun, nerdy stuff. And Steve is as much of a photography nerd as I am, so this is going to be a great conversation. First and foremost, if you're noticing this crazy flicker going on in the video, I don't know what is causing it. I know that it has something to do with the software I use for live streaming going into Zoom, and it's something with what's called virtual camera. I am talking with the support for that software, trying to figure out what the problem is. Hopefully they get back to me some point during this conversation, but I'm going to leave Steve pinned for most of it so nobody gets some crazy eye stuff going on with all this flickering. So I'm going to leave Steve pinned for whenever he is talking so that you don't see me and the crazy flickering. But real quick, for everyone watching live in the webinar or on YouTube, please share in the chat where you are watching from, and also if you prefer black and white or color photos. So like I said, today we are talking with my friend Steve Stanger. Welcome, Steve, to the Photographer Show. Can you tell everybody who's watching live and the recording later on a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Scott. First of all, thanks for having me on. This is great. Well, my name is Steve Stanger. I am a photographer here in Central New Jersey. It's photography kind of became a side gig. My full-time career that I had for almost 20 years, I'm an IT guy. A little while back, I decided to jump ship and go into retail management. At the beginning of this year, tried getting back into techie career, and then of course 2020 happened. But the one common thread through my life has always been photography. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome. So as a quick reminder for those joining us in the live webinar, please ask questions in the Q&A section. There is also the live chat as well. Normally Lori is monitoring all that. I'm going to try to multitask as we go through this. And if you're watching on YouTube, there's also a live chat there, which I am monitoring as well. So I see some people coming in from Florida, from Boston, from Columbus, more Florida, New York, Los Angeles, and I see a lot of black and white photography. That's fantastic. Oh, and on YouTube, we have Alabama, and he is thinking of changing primarily to black and white wedding photography. That's really interesting. We've got a Maryland, Colorado. Great, thanks for sharing. Please keep them coming. We want to know where you're coming from. So we're going to dive right into this, Steve. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I'm going to have to pretend that I know nothing about you. So this is going to be fun. So what was your first camera?
And it's funny, from having watched the show and the other people on, a lot of us have something in common. I think our first cameras, many of us, was the Kodak Instamatic. And for me, it was the 104, which was my mom's. And I like, when I tell that story, I like to say I borrowed it. I took it. I mean, it was, I was always fascinated with, she used to travel a lot when she was younger. So I was always fascinated with photos, and became the unofficial photographer of my family, and used to take that camera. And eventually I think she got me my own, on school trips and stuff, and had various cameras. But it wasn't until college that I actually got my first SLR, which was a Pentax, and I think it was the K1000, and bought it used. It was a great kit. Had bought it from a friend of mine, and it came with a bunch of lenses and filters and a flash. And at that time, really didn't know how to use it, and did a minor in college in fine arts. So there were some photography classes and stuff there. But yeah, and I had that camera for a very long time.
Yeah, that Pentax camera was a very popular camera, and it definitely was a a true workhorse that lasted a very long time for everybody who used it. I remember when you and I first met, when I was working at that camera store in New Jersey, we used to get those come in all the time. After, and you're talking, 20 years, maybe more after that camera came out,
Right.
that people were still using it and wanted, when they had a problem, they had to get it fixed. So,
and they were
really,
just, oh no, I was just gonna say, yeah, they were just super solid cameras. And really the only issue I had over maybe 20 years of using it before kind of going completely digital was there were a couple of lenses that just needed to be worked on. I had some, mold growth in one, and luckily I knew a camera tech that was like, I can handle, and he took it apart, cleaned it. I mean, it was great, but really out of the only issue was really just kind of a 2-lens problem that I had with it.
Yeah. And with lenses like that, taking it apart, there was no electronics in it. It was, you're talking purely mechanics, that you don't need the electrical knowledge that camera repair techs need now. You just needed to know mechanics, basically, in general, to be able
and it
to,
looked like watch work. I mean, it actually looked like the insides of a watch. So I mean, there's definitely a skill there.
Yeah, for sure. So what motivates you these days, especially during this pandemic? What motivates you to continue to create images that I know from knowing you, a lot of your images come from a general area. I mean, you go all over the place, of course, but a lot of them from a general area, which is one of my favorite areas in the state. So what motivates you to continue to create these images?
I mean, first and foremost with photography, it's my zen. It's my relaxation.
Yeah.
It's my go-to thing. It's and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later when we get into the photos and the camera that I use. But even switching the type of camera I was using to a smaller camera that I could take it with me. I mean, I was taking it to work with me all the time and taking just long walks at lunch and stuff like that. But I mean, part of also, and it took a while to kind of figure this out. Like I said, other than zen and a relaxation, I think all creatives experience this, but that whole flow thing or the flow state. And, I don't know, it's like, and it's funny, I have friends that are runners that are going to laugh at this, but to me, flow is that runner's high that the creative person gets, that you're just so into the moment, you're immersed into what you're doing. I'm sure I'm not the only one here that has, whether you're out shooting or you're back processing and editing your photos, and you sit down in front of your computer and it's 2 a.m. before you know it. Like you're like, okay, I get 4 hours sleep tonight, I guess. And that's the flow. That is you being so focused on what you're doing. I love that. I love being able to get myself into that. Easier said than done a lot of times, but when you hit that, it's just amazing. And that really is what still drives me to go out and shoot. And I assume you're talking about Asbury Park.
Yep.
Is the area that we both love shooting. And just as a little side note here, I mean, I've shot Asbury for as long, probably almost 30 years, probably going back to when I first got my driver's license, and used to drive. One of the reasons why it practically was falling into the sea 30 years ago. And it was always like a movie set to me. Like it was like, how can you have this beautiful area at the shore and you have these buildings that are falling apart and you have these restaurants and these signs that are falling apart? And I mean, I guess it took me a long time to realize I'm kind of drawn to that photography, the rusty and crusty, just stuff, nothing is permanent. I mean, I guess we could, years later after doing reading and stuff, I mean, I guess my photography also falls into the wabi-sabi type of photography where nothing is permanent, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect. So again, it's not like somebody said, hey, shoot this, and I went out and did it. I think it was kind of a definition looking for a term versus then a term going, hey, I'm going to shoot that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's funny. I mean, without kind of realizing it, I do shoot a lot of that. But going back to Asbury Park, and having always lived within like 30 minutes of that area over the last, say, 25 years, being able to go down there, there's very striking imagery down there. it is the Jersey Shore, but it really isn't the Jersey Shore in a way. And they're one of the photos we're going to look at. I know I had shot there, but it's not like what you think of or what is portrayed when you see it on TV or movies. What the Jersey Shore is, unless
Right.
it's something about a band playing at the Stone Pony or something like that. But
Right.
yeah, but just seeing the changes it's gone through, good and bad. There's a lot of historic buildings that are there that some they're taking care of, some they're kind of letting fall apart. And yeah, so it is. It's just an interesting place, and having something that interesting to shoot year round, and you could shoot at sunrise or sunset. I think
Right.
everybody kind of needs to find a place like that near them that
Yeah.
you can explore it in the winter and explore it in the summer,
Yeah.
in all the seasons actually.
Yeah, it's I can only imagine uh if you are looking in your catalog, your Lightroom catalog, or whatever you use for your as your management tool, looking at your historical photos of Asbury from when you first started photographing this one location to now, how drastic it is. Just from knowing Asbury over the years, I'm sure there's some really cool changes. Some where you've got photographs of this dilapidated building that that back 30 years ago was nothing, and now it's probably like a giant apartment complex, right? Because there's a bunch of those right on the boardwalk now. So that's got to be so interesting that I feel like you should probably put something together as like a your history of Asbury, and we're going to be looking at some of these photos from, I think they're all from more recently, right?
Yeah,
The
they
ones
were
we're
actually
looking.
all shot, and both were actually one. I think one we're looking at is from Asbury, and the other two are from another historical site here in New Jersey, which we would probably
Awesome.
talk about then.
Yeah. So what ways do you approach learning about photography these days?
I mean, it's funny. It's still YouTube, books, website and blogs, podcasts, even conferences. In the before time when we actually used to be able to go to conferences. One thing, with living, where we live, living in New Jersey, living in the Northeast, New York City is not that far away. So having the opportunity up until this year, being able to go to the Photo Plus Expo, and not only see friends you might have not seen in a while because everybody's all over the place, but actually make contact with photographers. The only place you might have seen them is online, or you might have read their books and stuff like that. But I mean, really, it's funny. I have this whole list, which when this gets published or I know it's going out on YouTube, but when it's saved on YouTube, I'll put a comment in with these. So I kind of cut that list down a lot. But really, the kind of active stuff that kind of keeps me going and I kind of use as reference to go back to, I know it sounds like pandering, but it's Photo Focus. I mean, I absolutely love the website. I mean, it's just, and if anybody's, I'm sure people that are watching have really explored the Photo Focus website. You got to check out the tutorial section. I mean, is it something I look at every week? Maybe not, but I will look at it one day or 2 days within a month and catch up. And not only are the articles great, but the articles usually refer to other videos or they're about other photographers. And what a cool way to learn about other photographers. And I love learning about other photographers' workflow. I love whether it's their workflow of sitting in front of, Lightroom or whatever they use to process their photos, or even their workflow when they're out working. And again, it could be anybody from, a photographer that might only have a few thousand followers to, or viewers on YouTube or subscribers on YouTube, all the way to, somebody like a Joe McNally that has, everybody knows, everybody knows about his lighting and have seen his classes. And I know he's even contributed to Photo Focus. Another resource, and somebody that I go back to quite often, is Derek Story. And he's done a podcast forever called the Digital Story Podcast, audio only, and the matching and the website that goes along with the podcast, the Digital Story.
Digital Story,
Yeah, it's such a great podcast. I mean, he talks about the philosophy behind photography and the steps behind photography, and he does have interviews once in a while. He does equipment reviews, but not so much that it would turn you off. Like, if usually I could care less about equipment reviews. I mean, I like staying on top of what's coming out, but I could care less about equipment reviews unless I'm looking for something new, and then I will research that.
Right.
Another person that I've listened to for a long time, podcast wise, is Ibarian X Perello. His book just came out called The Candid Frame. Oh no, I'm sorry. The Candid Frame was the podcast. His book called Making Photographs, which I think came out within the last 2 years, year or two. Just great. And he's another person that you have to do a search for on YouTube. Search his name out. He's awesome in interviews and very sharing. And again, somebody else who does talk about the process. You know, what made him shoot that? Why did he shoot that? What was he thinking? The next photographer that I go back to, he's got a ton of books, is David Duchemin. He's a Canadian photographer.
Right.
When I kind of rediscovered photography about 12, 13 years ago, he had just come out with his first book called Within the Frame. And it kind of became my photography Bible. I mean, it's one of those books I dip back into every so often. And he probably has maybe it's got to be more than a dozen books since then, but he did ebooks. He does a podcast that he's doing currently called A Beautiful Anarchy, again, where it's more about the psychology, and maybe not even so much aimed at photographers, more of the creative person. And of course it touches on photography, but he also has a great YouTube channel called Craft and Vision, where, you know, he hasn't updated it in a year, but the information is still there. Again, it's not about equipment, so it's not aged. It's not about software specifically, but again, the philosophy, the process, you know, behind his photography. And the last person actually I have two more. Rick Salmon is also another person that is amazing. I mean, another person that I kind of discovered and got into early on when I got back into photography. And I mean, just great. Again, ton of YouTube videos, bunch of books out there. Lucky enough to have met him before a couple of times. And really the last one that I have is This Week in Photo, which is hosted by Frederick Van Johnson. And it's a YouTube channel. And that is actually a video show, which, again, another place just to discover great photographers. They do have I believe it's a Facebook group, or might even be a Flickr group, where they'll go through, where people, put photos in, and they'll discuss those photos, they'll review those photos, they'll give tips and tricks on those photos. So you kind of get a really good mix there. And like I said, I went kind of overboard because I knew this question was coming up. I'll go ahead and post a list in there of, once this gets up on YouTube, so people can kind of check them out.
Cool. So you mentioned, then this is kind of a nice little segue into our short break, but you mentioned PhotoFocus has this big archive of content, a lot of educational content. PhotoFocus actually turned 21 this year, and every month there's a big contest that is free for anybody in the PhotoFocus community to join at photofocus.com/celebrate. And there's every month there's a free prize or prizes of some sort. So head over there to sign up. So how has photography changed the way that you see the world?
I mean, you know what? It's funny, from having done it so long. I mean, I guess it definitely makes you more observant. But even in more detail, to dig into a little bit deeper, is really the way light and shadow just plays off of each other, what it can do, what light and shadow does to a scene, and what it does at 9 o'clock in the morning versus 3 o'clock versus 6 o'clock versus sundown. And that's the thing with having a place to go to that you like to shoot, that you find interesting, being able to shoot through all those different times. So I think that's where it kind of comes from. But here's a question though. Did photography make us as photographers more observant, or did we go into photography because we are that observant? Like, we were already there, and we, from whatever age, from whatever, I mean, I was thinking about that. I'm like, wow, maybe that's why I'm attracted to photography because of that. But I mean, maybe I think it's somewhere in the middle probably.
Yeah,
And
I think there's somewhere there's a fine line there somewhere.
yeah, just like they say about genius and insanity, there's a fine line. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah, same thing.
but yeah, like I said, I mean, it's funny, a couple of weeks ago, I mean, or actually probably longer than a couple of weeks ago, and it's probably the only time I've actually gone to a restaurant. It was to celebrate my brother's birthday. So, isolated, masks on at the table until you get to the table, that thing. But I remember sitting, and it was at a restaurant over the water, and just sitting there, just staring out. And even one of my brothers went, he's doing it again. Because you just kind of lose yourself in, and the sun was setting. So I'm like sitting there going, oh, if I only had my camera,
Yeah.
or would it be rude if I ran outside and used the iPhone, that kind of thing. But, and I mean, I find myself kind of getting lost in that. I mean, luckily not when I'm driving, but, if you're able to really, if you're really able to sit there and observe, the things that draw us to photography. Again, it's light and shadow. I mean, it's what we do. It's in the name. We're painting and writing and drawing with light.
Yeah. I think if the only time it's rude to leave dinner and go outside and take a picture is if you're on a date. But then again, it's only rude if your date's not a photographer. If your date is a photographer, then he or she will understand.
Then they
right?
understand
So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I've been on both sides of that actually, but that's very true.
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to dive in to a couple of photos. Let's all right, where are you? Here you are. Okay, let me know when you see my screen.
Yep, I see it now.
Okay.
And that's actually the what they call the casino. It's the casino building actually in Asbury Park. And yes, I've shot there a bunch of times. Yes, I know when it rains heavy, it floods out in the middle like that. Usually there's a puddle there all the time, but I know when it rains, it gets pretty bad. So
this is also my favorite spot in Asbury is this general area right here.
Yep.
The two buildings that are next to each other right here
right.
is my favorite from here.
Right, because right next to this, from the view of this photo to the left of that is the carousel building. And thinking of it, I probably should have given you one of those photos too. But just again, amazing historic building. I mean, these buildings were there late 20s, early 30s. They've definitely seen better days. What kind of drew me to this, and kind of draws me to a lot of the photos I take, I find myself being drawn to very, let me phrase this the correct way, graphic scenes. And by graphic scenes, I don't mean like crime scenes or anything gruesome or anything like that, but definitely very much into like bold lines and leading lines and texture and contrast, and not only light and dark contrast, but color contrast, and drawn to bold colors when I'm shooting in color. Just to add also the three photos that we're showing, I did as a month of black and whites back in September, where I shot with the same lens, the same camera, did processing the same way. But again, I think a lot of what I'm into is kind of, other than the bold colors, is in this photo. It's very graphic as far as the lines. I love the reflection. The pattern there, and of course we like pattern, but there's also broken pattern, which I think makes it very interesting. I like the fact that the reflection actually shows a little bit more of the facade that is there and not there anymore. So that was kind of my take on this. And it was one of those days that I was, actually had the time that I was able to quote unquote work the scene, moved around a lot. I think this one, I think I was down on my knee, and I think the camera, had the screen in the back flipped up, and I think the camera might have been 3 inches above the puddle, and shot this. And I probably shot stuff close to this, early enough when there weren't people on there, but I'm kind of glad there were people there. I think it kind of adds to the story of the photo. I was even trying to get this photo to the point where, and I couldn't get low enough and the puddle wasn't big enough or far enough out, that I was even trying to get it to the point where the lines actually intersected, the actual lines in the reflection and the lines.
That would have been That would have been a
Yeah,
cool achievement if you were able to pull that off.
yeah, I think and it just there really wasn't an angle to do that at. Even
Right.
like I said, the camera was pretty low, and there wasn't really a way to do that with this photo.
Yeah. This building now is one. It's a big achievement to get it where there's such a few amount of people inside of it that you're able to move around and get a bunch of photos. But two, this building is now often used as an art installation. So I know this past summer there was like stuff hanging from the ceiling, and
Yep.
it was like a rainbow effect as you walk through it, and whatnot. So you were it was a good catch to be able to get it where there wasn't a lot of people, but also that there wasn't some interesting art installation that also could have impacted this frame.
Right. Oh
So
no,
it's good timing.
that's true. And even that, what's really cool about this area, um, and part of the area coming back, and it's for a number of years they've been doing something called the Wooden Walls Project, which that installation was part of, and even further down, actually around the outside of this building, there's amazing artwork
Right.
done, and they get these great local and national artists in to do these huge paintings. But even that's kind of and then further down, there's another building where they do that. But that's even interesting too, because it's art and it's beautiful to see, but it's left out to the elements. So it's not going to be there forever. So it's kind of cool to even see that stuff over time start breaking down. And when it does get to the point, they will actually replace artwork. Actually, I think this summer they did replace some of the artwork out there. Because again, it's painted on, it's just painted on wood. And it's attached to the side of the building. And it does eventually start breaking down.
Yeah. And for anybody who's watching who visits Asbury Park, right outside those doors that you see in this photo is an amazing Korean barbecue taco place called Mogo. So good. Anyway, okay. So this photo, this was digital or was it film as a black and
No,
white?
it's digital. I shoot completely digital now. Yeah. And, just to kind of dip a little bit into the processing on this, it's funny having a lot of presets and profiles now in Lightroom and stuff like that. I'll dip in and out of the Nick collection. I mean, I love it. And I don't, I find myself, if I use something too much, I find myself using it too much. I mean, I just am constantly going back.
Right.
This was actually done, this whole series, part of the quote unquote limitations I gave myself for this project was, again, same lens, same camera, do it in Silver Effects Pro. And it was actually a preset I made in Silver Effects Pro based on some black and white photos I had taken back in college and played around with it. And I could even tell you what film it was. I don't know if it was T-Max or whatever I had shot with back then. And even then, it's funny, I guess the project or something I was doing then when I was actually developing that film was to do very high contrast and or higher contrast than I guess I normally would. And that kind of became the basis of this project, between the images and really that processing after the fact. I don't know, kind of helped me kind of just gel this whole idea together. And I was really kind of happy with the photos, and they're photos of all different things in different places here. Mostly in New Jersey. But yeah, I really was kind of happy with the series.
It's interesting that you not only are using Silver Effects, but you're building a preset for Silver Effects, which is not something that you often hear photographers doing these days. Usually it's Photoshop or Lightroom or Luminar or something like that. But not only are you using Silver Effects for this project, using a preset you created, but it's a preset based on a photo you took years ago, right? So I think that's it doesn't get much more personal and personalized than that, right? So that makes this project even more interesting. So let's dive into the next one.
Okay.
Yeah. Here we go.
All right. So the next two photos were actually shot at Fort Hancock here in New Jersey. If you're familiar with the beaches in New Jersey, one of the most popular public beaches is Sandy Hook. And at the very tip of Sandy Hook, there's Fort Hancock, which was probably around since, I know it was around during the Revolutionary War, but it wasn't built up because of where it's located. It's pretty much at the tip of the bay leading into Manhattan and New York City. In the 1800s, that's when it was actually built up to be a fort. And then around leading up to World War II, it actually became a gun encampment place. They had these huge guns there. And then even later on, they actually had, which I found out fairly recently, up until I think it was 1974, they actually had ground to air nuclear missiles there. Nuclear missiles. And that was for trying to catch planes coming in and doing, during the Cold War, doing any kind of damage to the Northeast and New York City and what have you. But it's pretty much been part of the national park system since the 70s. A lot of it is kind of, again, another place it's a shame, beautiful historic area that a lot of the buildings are starting to fall apart. Now, one of the things that I was doing as part of this project too, it's going to sound funny to a lot of photographers, is I do tend to shoot a lot of wide photos. I like getting, even if I'm zooming in or taking steps, and this was shot with 25 millimeter prime on an Olympus camera, which really makes it a 50 millimeter when it comes to full frame. But anyway, I even went back and looked at the shots leading up to this, and it was wide. Initially I thought this was kind of interesting, but it had the steel stairs on either side. And then I'm like, no, take a step in. That's really not where the story is. And take another step in. And there was something about the way the shade, or the shadows rather, from the tree were hitting this wall, the cracks in the wall, the no ball playing sign kind of going away. And in my mind, the story was, okay, here's this great wall back when this was actually a fort. And, you probably had guys out there smacking a ball against, playing handball or whatever. And somebody went, I'll show you, no ball playing. And what also cracked me up too is how the no ball playing is actually off-centered.
Yeah.
It's actually off-centered. And then that probably didn't stop people. And they're like, we'll show you, we're going to cement a chair in here. And so, to me, I kind of find it funny. I know other people don't. I like the graphic nature of this. And of course, anything that has text in it is drawing your eye in. But
yeah,
I just think, again, going back to light and shadow, I think this photo at noon is not this photo. And I'd spent more than an afternoon, actually a good portion of a day walking around. And this was probably towards the end of the day. I think that the sun was going down. I turned around and went, wow, that's really kind of cool looking. Just, again, that's kind of the initial thought, and go, wow, I wonder if there's something there. And just everything about, even looking at the ground and just those, the seams and the concrete leading you into the picture. And then that bench that was just lit that way. It was almost like it was spotlight. And then of course, like I said, just the shadows that you're getting through the trees. I don't know, to me, just the angle, I'm like, yep, that's one of the shots. That's definitely something I have to include in that set.
Yeah, the stars completely aligned for this photo, from top to bottom. And then the fact that you got the perspective perfectly, vertical and level, and everything is very accurate, just enhances the whole photo. If you were slightly angled, it wouldn't be as impactful. But the fact that it has that cinematic straightness, right, really adds to it. And I am a big fan of minimalism. I've got some photos that are kind of a similar thing, where it's a blank wall and there's something going on in the bottom or whatever, right? And I'm a big fan of minimalism and having a lot of empty space. But I'm even more of a fan when that empty space is filled with something else that's interesting, that's still empty. The shadow's still empty, but it just adds that little bit that really draws you in. It makes you look all around this frame, looking for whatever you can find, right? And it that crack as well makes me think, okay, is this wall now so unstable that I can push it over? Obviously you can. It's still a fort wall, but it really makes you wonder how degraded is the quality of the structure now. And really the story, what you were saying about the ball playing and what really went down, I wonder how accurate you are. You could be spot on for that story, right?
Right. I mean, I could just see it happening, and considering the history of this place, yeah, that it could have been, used for so many years, and that maybe ball playing was okay, and then somebody in that office, because it was, I believe this was a officer's office building, because this was 3 stories, and yeah, like like it makes me wonder, like it just was like, wow, I could see them playing ball there. I mean, it was a perfect handball, or if they were even doing like a racquetball type game there and stuff. And then somebody, they spray paint the letters on, and then, like I said, and then they didn't stop, and they're like, fine, we're going to put a chair here right in the middle. It was just like I said, it just really kind of cracked me up. And one thing I will also add to this, and those I'm sure many people are shooting digital, and of course I know people are still shooting film. This is the first time I did like a black and white project like this, where I actually set my camera to monochrome on the screen and in the viewfinder. The thing is, with the Olympus camera, and I'm not sure with the Olympus I have, maybe this series, I know with a lot of other cameras, you can actually get a RAW that comes out black and white. It still has all the color information. Right. The Olympus that I have will shoot RAW, and then you could also set it up that it'll do a black and white JPEG. And if I like it really doesn't have film emulation. It's just kind of a monochrome. And I knew I was going to still go in and edit. So even though I was viewing it in black and white, and viewing it in black and white when you're shooting for black and white, color's gone. You're looking for, again, all the things I said before, the very graphic image, the light, the shadow, the graphic elements, the texture. And when you kind of, when you set your screen or your viewfinder to black and white, or monochrome rather, it helped so much doing this. Right. Where I have done this in previous years and didn't get the kind of results that I got this time. And I think a big part of that was actually seeing it in black and white, was literally seeing that scene through the camera in black and white, going, yep, I really like what it's doing. And not second guessing myself.
Yeah. I do that every so often with my Nikon bodies. I will throw them into, I always photograph in RAW, so I will throw them into in monochrome mode. It will photograph in black and white, but the RAW file retains the color, just has it basically desaturated, so that in the back of the screen, I'm only seeing it in black and white. And then when I import into Lightroom, it's black and white, but I can hit reset to bring all the color back. And I do that every so often as a sort of a way to refresh my brain, to see in black and white, right? There was one photo trip that I went on where I forgot if it was Seattle or if it was somewhere else, but I spent the entire week in black and white mode while not home, not in a familiar territory, right? I'm in a place, learning the area, seeing brand new things, and only photographing in black and white. Of course, I have them all in color, which is amazing.
Right.
But I spent that week only seeing in black and white, which is so interesting to do. Before we move into the last photo, I just want to remind everybody who's watching live, either on YouTube or in the Zoom webinar, please, if you have a question for Steve, whether it's about his photos, whether it's about his Olympus cameras, anything like that, whatever it is, if you have a question for Steve, please ask it in the Q&A. If you're on YouTube, please ask it in the live chat. I will get to it after we go through this last photo. All right, so one more photo.
And what I will say, good.
The floor is crooked.
Yes, the floor is bizarre. Okay. I'll explain that. What I was going to say, though, is like you, I shot Nikon forever. Right. From my first, DSLR through, before getting into Olympus. And again, the Olympus, the reason why I went with the Olympus was I wanted a smaller camera. I had looked at Fuji's and Sony's, and then kind of really let's get serious about the budget here. And this kind of fit that. And it allowed me to go, all right, I definitely want to get a prime lens, and I definitely want to get extra batteries. And then, so that's why I went with the Olympus. And I got to tell you, I've been super happy with it. And we could talk about that more after this photo. But yeah, the Olympus, just kind of a no-brainer, just to throw it in a bag, my backpack, and just go, kind of thing. Right. And it's not as obvious as pulling out a big honking, Not that they're that big anymore. I mean, with the Z
Right.
series, they're really not that big anymore. So I may be
Yeah.
back to Nikon sooner than later.
Oh.
Okay. The weird thing about this building, first of all, this photo was shot through a window. Which
Interesting.
again, it was the same place. It was at Fort Hancock, so I know I wasn't invading anybody's privacy. This was part of this kind of reminded me of back when I used to do in my younger days, Urban X or Urban Exploration, back when, there might have been old buildings that when they were finally closed and shut down, they lasted more than a week before they were torn down for something new. And you were able to go in and either officially or unofficially and take, get some really interesting pictures. So walking around, and it was kind of winding down the day, and I happened to look in this window, and it's an old gymnasium. One end, the part that I was interested in, the other side of the gymnasium, something pushed the floor like 3 feet. And the floor actually shifted, but didn't break apart. It actually created a wave in the middle of this building. Now, if I was able to get into it, and there was not a way to get an angle of it. I have photos of it, but nothing that I would share. What you're seeing in the lower left-hand corner is the end of that wave. And it was amazing how the planks of this flooring stayed together. Like it almost looked like a sculpture. So as I'm walking around, I kind of came across this, and the ball sitting there, and those old school chairs, and the very old school subway tile. I mean, just everything about it. And even the light through the window. I mean, again, creating these very kind of bold type shapes there and just lines. And probably shot 6 photos from this. And again, it's the camera pushed up against glass, shooting through. I did walk around and try to get shots from other areas, but nothing. It just, the inside of this area, I mean, I don't even know if they're using it for storage or whatever. I mean, I'd be a little concerned about going into this building because a lot of these older buildings did have asbestos and other stuff that you don't want to breathe in that dust. But there was just something about this photo. And there's, again, like a weird kind of abstract to it that you're not sure what's happening in the front corner. And then the back upper right corner, you see the ground starting to slope up again with that one chair that's kind of, so I don't, it just really kind of caught me. And then, it's funny, after sharing this, I had a number of people, one thing that I do like, and when I post a photo, and I'm usually careful with what I name photos, I like when people interpret it their way. Somebody had sent me this whole kind of story that they put together just about this, and it was like the last day, and it was somebody playing, and they left their ball behind. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, I'm not making fun of it, but for a photo that you share, to move somebody to say, wow, this is what I'm, without knowing the story or what I was thinking, this is what made them feel.
Yeah.
You
it's kind of funny how it's how this photo and in this photo have a similar theme going on, almost as if so the person got mad that there was a sign that said no ball playing. Then he got mad that they put a bench in place, and then he started playing inside the gym, and then they said, okay, well, you can't play in the gym with the ball, so we're gonna ruin the floor. And he said, screw this, and he just left the ball and left.
That's very funny. I didn't, it's funny, I didn't even think of that. And when I shared them, I don't even think I shared them back to back. When I do something like this, and usually when I'm sharing photos on social media, and mainly photos on Flickr and Instagram, I'll try to space them out at least a day or two, because everybody, we're all overloaded with images. But that's funny. I didn't even think of that. I think that's funny. I'm almost wondering if I shouldn't frame them together and kind of tell a story that way.
Yeah,
that's great, Scott. See, so you're putting stuff together there too.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of photography is everybody can interpret the way they want to interpret.
Right. And it's, again, it was just, even I don't shoot a lot of it's kind of funny doing black and white, because I do, within my photography, I do sprinkle black and white in, because again, sometimes you take images where they do lend themselves to being more black, leaning more towards black and white because of the details in the photo than a color photo. Sometimes color can be very distracting, but also just the crop. Also, I'm much more comfortable shooting in landscape as opposed to this. So as in portrait mode. So that was also part of this series too, is that most of the photos are presented in portrait mode. And that's something that kind of came as I was developing through the month, kind of getting an idea of these photos. The initial week or weekend that I went out to shoot, a number of those photos were actually shot in landscape. And once I'm like, you know what, I think I'm going to present them all this way. And actually, some of them are cropped down, but the majority of the photos that were shot for that black and white month were done in this orientation.
Nice. So was this made before or after Hurricane Sandy?
Oh no, this was shot literally shot in September. These were all brand new.
So I actually wonder if the floor became this way after the storm, and maybe because the fort is so close to the beach still, if a lot of that sand was literally pushed under the building and pushed the floor up.
It could,
and maybe that's why it's still in place, because now the sand is so compacted, basically creating a new ground.
Right, and holding it up. That could be. Yeah. I mean, again, and that's the other thing too. When I do these kind of, give myself photo assignments, they're all new photos. I mean, they're not, I will go back, and especially early on when the lockdowns were happening and nobody was really kind of going anywhere, I was getting antsy. So I was going back through old photos earlier this year and just reprocessing them. I mean, Lightroom has come a long way in the 9 or 10 years that I've been using it. And Photoshop, I mean, I've been using Photoshop since before it was Photoshop, when I'd gotten my first scanner, and I'm like, ooh, what's this? I could take somebody's face and move it from here to here, that kind of thing. But I think you're right. I think that's, I didn't even think of that, but it is amazing to see this. And again, that's probably going to be an ongoing thing, seeing if I can get in or get the shot of what this floor looks like, because it looks like a sculpture. I mean, it really is amazing how, for the most part, these slats stayed, and for the most part, the floor is flat on either side, but you've got this, and it's angled across the building inside, this floor is angled with this wave, and it's just like, you stand there and go, did somebody make that? Like, did somebody purposely do that? But you're right, maybe there is enough dirt or sand underneath that's helping hold that shape. That's holding it, that's holding it up.
Yeah. So interesting. Well, thank you for sharing all three of these photos.
Sure.
We'll be sure to include a link so people can see more, of course, when this gets published on Photo Focus. Let me stop screen sharing real quick. We have a question from Rob McIntosh. He says, what size do you prefer for your prints for when you're exhibiting your work?
That's really a good question. I would say, for me, minimally an 11 by 14 in that dimension. It's kind of funny, a little, and I don't want to go too far off the track here, but I would definitely say I like 11 by 14. This year, as far as, and last year I kind of took a break, not from photography, but from displaying anything or really kind of going anywhere or approaching people about putting my photos out. This year, jokingly, I was calling it the Coffee House and Restaurant Tour, because I had a bunch of coffee houses lined up. And what's great about a coffee house is they're looking for artists. They bring in musical artists, and they're looking for new art on their walls, usually every month. And I know a lot of musicians. I also know a lot of people that kind of book these places, and the same people that book the musical artists book the artists to hang their stuff on the wall, whether you're a photographer, mixed media, painter, whatever. So I had a bunch of stuff set up from February till the end of the summer. Now, some of that stuff was going to be in a, my own kind of wall, my own showing in some of these places. Some of them were kind of shared in some of the restaurants. And then there were a couple of gallery, but it was going to be like 1 or 2 photos for the galleries. The reason why I bring all this up, when I post or when you're hanging stuff up in a restaurant or a in a coffee shop, you kind of have to read the room. Where a gallery, you could probably get away with a $300 photo or more. So when I do gallery specific prints, I do them very large. I also get them, not that I usually go off that far off of standard crops, but I do sometimes do. I mean, there's stuff that I will definitely do 16:9 or a longer, more of a cinematic type looking crop where I will get them, it's custom framework and it's more money and, the quality of the print's the same. But again, it's going to be hanging in a gallery. And that was my original take on the photo. So when I'm hanging stuff up in a coffee house or a restaurant, I am charging much less than that, or trying to sell for much less than that. So I will buy frames, and they're still good frames, but they are standard size. So I will get prints done in those standard size. Again, another way to kind of cut costs, and I will do the framing myself. It's funny because I've actually had photographers ask me that have hung up before or after me, and they're like, how do you, and I mean, they're not cheap. I mean, what we do, there's a value to it. And people want to know if they're spending money on your photos, they're getting their worth. They
Right.
want to know they're getting something. And so you kind of have to find this happy balance, and depending on where you're at, you'll get it. Also, I also use hanging out in public a way to promote my website. I mean, my website is the sales site. I share a lot more of my photos on Instagram and Flickr than that make it to the sales site. And I kind of rotate through the photos that are up there just to kind of keep it interesting. And, if people are revisiting it and looking for stuff, hopefully they're finding something new. But I hope that answers the question. I know that was a roundabout way to answer the question, but like I said, minimally my photos, I like them as a, minimally 11:14, fairly close to that.
Yeah. Awesome. Daniel Smith asked, on the first image, the one of the Asbury Park
Right.
casino, it's so funny calling it a casino when it's no longer a casino.
Right. And I mean, we call it the casino because it literally is you could kind of see the remains of the letters up there still.
Yep. On that image, why didn't you get lower to frame the building in the distance?
That's a good question. And if I'd thought about it, I probably would have. No, that's actually there wasn't a reason not to. I wanted to make sure I know exactly what he's talking about, because the tower from the building in the distance, which is actually the Paramount Theater, is literally touching one of the cross members of that doorway. You're right. I mean, I literally probably just a slight angle down or up, down, up. One of those two would have actually given a little bit of a separation there. But part of that, I guess, is for me. One, I didn't really notice it. I mean, like I said, I was really, for myself, concentrating on both the the lines in the reflection and the lines of the facade that was left. One of the things that I did do, and kind of angling around and kind of working the area or working the room, was it was shot in Asbury, and there's actually a sign that you can see, a street sign that it says is it Asbury Avenue or Asbury Road there? And I wanted to make sure that was there, even though it's not super noticeable. I mean, you really kind of have to. I kind of wanted that there. I did. And there's a lot going on. I mean, he has a good point. I mean, I think. It's funny. Now I want to go back through the other photos and see if I did. It just really wasn't something I was concentrating on. I probably could have done it, but the focus of that photo wasn't to frame that. And I've done that in the past. I've moved closer to one of those openings where it's one of the frame within the frame type photos where you have that archway, that doorway there, kind of framing the rest of the boardwalk. Yeah. But he's got a good point. He's really got a good point.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about that location is, and it's not. I mean, you can tell in the photo, but it's also not that obvious that it's pretty dark in the casino. And when you're there during daylight, it's really bright outside. So there's a huge contrast, and our eyes as humans are focused on where we are, not what's on the outside, right? So we're paying more attention to what's right in front of us and what we want to get in frame that's right in front of us. So my guess is, at the same time as, I should have thought about it, is you were so focused on that entryway because that's what was right in front of you, and that's what you saw in the reflection in the puddle, not the building in the background.
Right.
But at the same time, now that Daniel asked that question, you're going to be looking for that building in the background every time you do this.
So, I mean, oh no, but he's right. But you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. Really.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
And part of that also is maybe I don't know if it's a huge negative, but partly a negative of shooting there so much. Like you do, like I said, I wanted to make sure the sign was noticeable. I wanted to make sure, and I was there for a while. I mean, people were walking, around me and around the big puddle that was there. But even the placement of the people, like I didn't want necessarily somebody breaking the line, or pretty much almost like standing in front of me. So in that photo, the closest person to me is just about to walk into the casino.
Yep.
And the person walking away had come through and walked away. To me, that would have been more of a distracting than the building in the background. That, having those people fairly close. I think it's interesting having the people in there, but like I said, but you're right. I mean, every time, now I have to go redo that photo. Now I have to, but no, I mean, but he's right. And that's great that he caught that. But yeah, I think part of that was from having shoot it. We might see things that aren't necessarily there, and from shooting that area so much, we kind of trick ourselves too into thinking, everything's framed.
Yep. So we are going to end this conversation in a minute. I have one final question for you, unless somebody else asks a question in the next minute or so. Can you share a tip for photographers about either a technique or equipment or something along those lines that you think would be a good takeaway from this conversation?
Okay. Well, I actually have two tips. One's kind of a techie tip. I'll make them fast because I know we're running out of time. One's a techie tip and one's a photography tip. As far as the photography tip, this year, I don't have to, it just sucked. I mean, people have had it worse than me. Luckily, knock on wood, no family, but I mean, work's been affected. A lot of stuff's been affected. So my photography tip is, even if you're not feeling motivated to go shoot, I mean, we can't really travel anywhere. You're not really supposed to travel anywhere. Pick up your camera. Even if you're like Steve, no, I'm telling you, pick up your camera, walk around your neighborhood. We see our neighborhood every day. The town that I live in now, I moved here about a year ago, and I think it has been March, and I probably didn't shoot for a long time. And I said, you know what? I drive through the town and I drive home. I've really never walked down Main Street, down one of the side streets. It helped so much just to clear my head, focus on something totally different than everything else that's going on. So my tip is go. Shoot even if it's just, may not feel comfortable walking into town or have a local, like a town center to walk to. Shoot around your house. Shoot around your house as if you were showing somebody in another country what your house looked like. Stop thinking about it as architecture you see all the time. Shoot details. Give yourself an assignment. Try doing some abstracts around your house. You might not be into like still life photography or tabletop photography. Do it. It might seem like you're forcing yourself. It might seem, and it's like, and this is kind of something I borrowed from a friend of mine, Jim Woods, who's a writer. And it's funny because the reason why I'm thinking of it, I actually have it right on my desktop. It's a graphic I stole from him. That creativity leads to more creativity. And I think that's the truest thing. And regardless of what you are creative, in this case, photography, you will start feeling better. And again, it goes back to that whole flow state. You really, even if you don't feel like shooting and picking up your camera, pick up your camera. If you have pets, shoot your pets. But almost do almost like a fashion shoot. I mean, really kind of do that. Get up and go. And I know it worked for me. I mean, it helped me feel much better. It helped me kind of set my mind right. The other tip is really kind of a quick techie tip. Everything we do now is on computers. I'm assuming even if you shoot film, you've got stuff scanned into your computer. You have to have a backup. And I'm not talking about copies and an external hard drive. That's kind of good to have right here. But if something horrible happens and everything goes up, you're going to be in trouble. And the reason why I bring this up is I was just talking to a photographer who's a pretty serious photographer, had no offsite backup. None.
Oy.
None. So there are different services out there. Like I use Backblaze. It's like $7 a month. It's a program that runs in the background, uploads. It's all secure. Uploads your internal drive. I have a bunch of external drives that hang off of my Mac. And I've used them for years and years and years and years. And I've had hard drives go down where, I mean, you can actually go and pull specific files if you need them. If you need an entire hard drive, they will actually send you a hard drive, charge you $180 and then you return it and you get that refunded. I mean, it's worth it. I know there's other services out there, but if you do not have any form of off-site backup, you need it. I'm telling you, and that kind of goes back to my computer consulting days, but recently just had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a serious photographer, and he goes, but I have hard drives. I'm like, yeah, they're in your house. What happens? But I mean, you don't hope for that. You don't wish for that. All the insurance in the world that will replace all your equipment isn't replacing those man hours and that creativity of photos.
Yeah, I do. So I've got, clones in my house, and then I have another clone that I leave at my in-laws' house, which is about a half mile away. And so I've got that I update that at once a month, and then I have Backblaze on top of that, as well as like JPEGs being stored on Amazon Photos and stuff like that.
I mean, all of that's perfect.
Redundancy.
Yep, yeah. And you really need that. And again, local redundancy is fine. I mean, there have been times I've had files that get corrupted on, say, my main external photo drive, and I was able to go to one of the backups and just pull it over. But yeah, I mean, it's offsite, and that's something I used to do too. I used to have a drive that would I'd have two drives that would make the round trip to my folks. And when I was drop it off, bring the old one back, update that one for the next. Yeah, I mean, that's another way to do it too. And then it's like insurance on top of insurance, having something like Backblaze.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve, for sharing your photos, your insights, your photo nerdiness with us.
Definitely.
And it's been a while since we've seen each other face to face,
right?
Even though we live like 20 minutes from each other.
Yep.
But this pandemic is definitely impacting everything. So thank you to everybody who's watched live, who shared where they're coming from, what cameras they started out with. And Steve, if you go back and look at the live chat on YouTube and in Zoom, you're going to see a lot of people thankful as well. Rob Fuzz saying Steve has an awesome eye, great tip. So there's a lot of great stuff here. Thank you again. Thank you to everybody who's watching live and recording. Thank you, Steve. And we are going to go to the outro. Again, I apologize for the shakiness, the little weird stuff you're about to see as it shakes. I don't know. I can't wait till I get that fixed. Anyway, here we go.